welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom. We're looking at these 12 rules for radicals, and number 9 was the threat is usually more terrifying than the thing itself. Imagination and ego can dream up many more consequences than any activist. So the idea is that they're going to manipulate the thinking of others, and it's kind of tied in with rule number 10, which is if you push a negative hard enough, it will push through and become a positive. What does that mean? Well, he talks about, violence from other side can win the public to your side because the public sympathizes with the underdog. So you want to appear as the underdog, appear as the victim, have other people attack you. Well, that's what you see a lot in the Antifa movement now, although the Antifa people are often the ones doing the attacking, but everybody, this victim, they strive to be the victim, or victims of white supremacists. And you cannot even find white supremacists anymore. They're so rare in this country. But so then they say, well, if you're white, you automatically privileged. And I can give you all kinds of black people who say that there is no white privilege, but there is black privilege. That's what affirmative action is. But they're not really interested in being experts, in other words, to see the truth. So they get all mixed up in their delusion because they want to be justified because their identity comes from their political ideology rather than from their individuality. Because individuality requires individual morality, and they don't want that. They want to identify with an ideology. And then once you identify with an ideology, then you can go read the article on ideological subversion and see how they manipulate the ideology so that you become the very beast, the very criminal that you're supposedly fighting against, which is, Che Guevara is one of the prime examples of this. Che Guevara, rich kid, who felt like people were being oppressed and wanted to do something about it, got a part of the communist revolution, and then he just oppressed people left and right. He was a murderer. I just would almost think it was funny when I see, black activists wearing Che Guevara T-shirts as if somehow he's their revolutionist. He absolutely hated blacks. He wanted to exterminate them. He thought they were less than human. And here they are promoting the very guy who went, he put a gun to the head of children and shot them. Young kids, young girls, tied up and executed them. He was not a good guy. Not in the least. But if you don't know your history, you won't realize that. But the point here is this, you can't push a negative and turn it into a positive. This is Emperor Palpatine kind of logic, anger, draws you into the dark side according to Yoda, but the Emperor wanted poor Luke to get angry because it would give you power. But what eventually destroyed the Emperor was the fact of forgiveness and compassion. But he couldn't see forgiveness and compassion. He couldn't see the power of forgiveness and compassion and sacrifice. He couldn't see the power of that because he's not in a kingdom of his own. He's imprisoned in his own prison, which we call hell. And that's what these kinds of ideas, some of these ideas are kind of good, but then where do they actually lead you to? Because the mix and how they mix together. They're drawing you into the dark side, and the dark side will be a prison where no light can come in for you. And you simply will not see where the real power is. What we're seeing going on, playing out today in the media where you have these two sides, these two dialectics, Republican and Democrat, or left and right. They divide things up into left side and right side, and they create this dialectic. The reality is they're both over there on this side of creating conflict and creating enemies. And they're engaged in this battle of being angry at one another. And you're conservative now. Right at the moment, the Democrats have the power in Congress, I guess, in the Senate. The conservatives don't have the moral character to win this battle because, they have some moral character, but they don't have enough to win this battle because they're fighting it all on the wrong tactics. Because they're still over here in this dialectic, which we have articles on what a dialectic is. But number 11, because we'll get through with these last two, is the price of successful attack is a constructive alternative. Never let the enemy score points because you're caught without a solution to the problem. Even if your solution is not a real solution, just you declare it to be a solution. Like I said, you have this delusion that you're a millionaire, or you're a female, or you're a male when you're actually the opposite. And it's a delusion. It's not real. But people become so in love with having their own delusion, they want to allow everybody else their delusion. So you have a nation of deluded people. The problem is delusionalism is contagious. It carries over into other aspects of your life, and you will not see the whole truth. That's why, if you will not step outside of what you imagine to be your field of expertise, it's because if you do step outside, you may find out you're not quite the expert you thought you were. And that's what they're doing, is they're trying to avoid reality. And if you make a habit of trying to avoid the truth, the reality, that first they want to say there is no truth. This is the postmodernism. There is no truth. There is no absolutes. If it's true for you, then it's true. That is sucking you into the dark side. That is really a bad place to go. There are standards of truth and reality in the universe. The laws of physics, the laws of cause and effect, they are real. And that's why Christ talks so much about the law of cause and effect. As you judge, so shall ye be judged. If you will not forgive, you cannot be forgiven. Give so that freely give so that you may freely receive. I mean, it's the law of cause and effect. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. That's the principle. Number 12. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. Does that sound like a good idea? He says cut off the support network and isolate the target from sympathy, often by fraudulent means. Go after people and not institutions. So they're not dealing with principles, they're just attacking. It's the ad hominem. That's why you see so many ad hominems coming out of the left today. But you also see them coming out of the right because, again, they don't have the moral character to fight in this dialectic. You want to be separate from this dialectic. And so they talk about, these false accusations at people and to create these false criteria, that in the argument, challenge them. Oh, yeah, but they did this, but they... I could go into all the details, but let's actually go back to this thing that this article, the Useful Idiot article that Snopes talks about, that Saul Alinsky did not write these 8-point plan to socialism. We took a little quick look at what Saul Alinsky did write, but what he did not write the 8-point plan for socialism, to create socialism. It was actually, as far as an 8-point plan, we've already seen that it was around way back in 1934 by the little cartoon at the top of the page, which says, spend, 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 under the guise of recovery, bust the government, blame the capitalists for the failure, junk the Constitution and declare a dictatorship. That was the goal back in 1934, and but the reality is that this plan, which kind of echoes that, was written in the 60s, and it was written by two guys, Cloward and Piven, Piven is a woman, Frances Piven. But it was written in 1966, basically written, although there were elements of this around. This is the most famous creation of it. And it's called the Cloward-Piven strategy. And it explains how you could hasten the fall of capitalism by overloading the entitlement system, which would push society into an economic crisis and collapse. That would unleash chaos and violence in the streets, opening the door to radical leftist political change. Because they believed in communism, they believed in this, that somehow, but the reason they believed that communism would work is because they've already closed their minds to the truth. This is the fact that they're not really experts in history. They're not really experts in human nature, which is why people like Jordan Peterson are gaining such popularity, is that he's a clinical psychologist. He understands people just because he's spent a lifetime trying to figure out what makes people tick and how that works and what doesn't work and what is destructive to the personality and what actually improves their life, because he's been watching it firsthand. Snopes sees these 8 points attributed to Alinsky, and they make a big point out of that's false. But the points are not false. It's just Alinsky didn't write them. And their whole critique of these 8 points, they don't even mention Cloward Piven, who wrote it. And so the fact that the conservative is not doing their homework and they're just repeating what somebody said that was incorrect allows Snopes to come along and say, oh, this is false, this is just ridiculous. Well, it's real. Not only are these people implementing this and wrote it, implemented it, it's actually been taking place. It's a part of history now. Michael Reisch and Janice Andrews wrote in the book Road Not Taken that Cloward and Piven proposed to create a crisis in the current welfare system by exploiting the gap between welfare law and practice that would ultimately bring about the collapse and replace it with a system of guaranteed annual income. They hoped to accomplish this end by informing the poor of their rights to welfare assistance. You know, you have a right to health care. You have a right. They disregard the actual facts of how this comes about. If you have a right, and I see conservatives trying to explain what they're missing, but they don't quite understand it either, because they're really on the left too. They're both over there on the left. Some are right side of the left side. Some are the left side of the left side. But the reality is they all are engaged in covetous practices. You do not have a right to take away from your neighbor his life, his well-being. And that's why you see them saying that infanticide is okay now, because they've already been taking away the life of one another for years, like Polybius said. They've become accustomed to living at the expense of others. You think, oh, not me. I don't. Do you send your kids to public school? Do you have the government in a bankrupt system taking care of your parents? You're not taking care of them. Well, that's covetous practices. You want your neighbor. And does your government borrow against the future of your children and your unborn children in order to provide all these services that you should be providing for yourself? Yes, they do. All these nations are borrowing against the future of their children and unborn children, of their own children and their neighbors' children. That's coveting those children's goods, their life, their sweat, their toil. But people can't see that, because they would have to look at themselves. They'd have to become an expert in the problem. So they don't see that. So Reich and Andrews they said they hoped to accomplish this end by informing the poor of their rights to covet their neighbor's goods. They don't have a right to covet their neighbor's goods. So anyway, Cloward and Piven, as confirmed progressive socialists, they were. Alinsky claimed he wasn't a socialist. He didn't advocate socialism. He was against it. He thought it was detrimental. He wasn't entirely being honest with himself in that, and maybe wasn't even entirely being honest. But Cloward and Piven, they were socialists. And they were not apologetic for it. Inspired by the philosophy of communism, the organizing skills of Saul Alinsky. So his organizing skills is what brought them together. And they were also supposedly inspired by the Watts riots of August 1964. I lived right next to Watts at that time during those riots. We could actually hear gunfire from our front yard. So they believed that chaos would need to be achieved before they could introduce their progressive political ideology, which was the ideology of democratic socialism masquerading as the salvation of the people. This is still going on today. All the things that they mention in their 8 points you can actually, if you have any memory, if you're not, a teenager, or if you've done any studying of history, even your recent history, you can see that all these things have been implemented on a regular basis. They both admittedly understood that welfare, like the free bread of Rome, weakened the poor by providing an all-too-convenient social safety net, which worked as the opiate of the people, which was socialism. And what have I said many times? Socialism is the religion you get when you lose your religion. Because religion was not what you think about a supreme being. That was not the definition of religion for thousands of years. It is the definition today, but just 200 years ago, the definition of religion was the pious performance of your duty to God and your fellow man. It's how you took care of the needy in your society. That's what religion was. But when you lose that and you think religion is just what you think about Jesus, then the only religion you have left is socialism. And socialism brings you back to the bondage of Egypt, to the oppression of Rome. And so that you have no daily ministration in your church. If you need any bread to be rightly divided from house to house, you go to men who call themselves benefactors but exercise authority one over the other. Something Christ said it was not to be that way with Christians, with the followers of Christ. If a Christian is a follower of Christ, it's somebody who's doing what Christ said to do and not doing what Christ said not to do. Christ said to sit down in the tens, hundreds, and thousands, to love one another, using a word that is also translated charity, to take care of one another. And the early church was rightly dividing the bread from house to house in a daily ministration based on faith, hope, and charity, while Rome was dividing the bread from house to house based on a system of force. John the Baptist said, don't do it by force, do it by charity, sharing. So the cultural elements of Christianity have been removed from the modern Christian culture. They are doing things more like the Pharisees did them, because they've lost sight of the basics of the gospel of the kingdom. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, even through the agency of government. Cloward and Piven promoted this idea of coveting because they knew it would change the nature of the people as well as change the nature of society. I don't know if they actually, read Polybius, but are they that demonic that they could read Polybius and say, oh yeah, we can change people? So anyway, Cloward told the New York Times in September 27th, 1970, This is about the time that Solinsky was about to publish his book. I think he published it in 1971. Rather than placating the poor with government handouts, activists should work to sabotage and destroy the welfare system. It would call for cadres, and I'm quoting here, of aggressive organizers to use demonstrations to create climate of militancy in a massive drive to recruit the poor onto the welfare rolls. This is back in the 70s. Swamping the bureaucracy with new applicants and bankrupting government. George Alvin Wiley and others used this crisis strategy through the National Welfare Rights Organization, which certainly added to the bankruptcy of New York City, which took place just 5 years later. Sol Stern, he was an author in the Manhattan Institute City Journal, wrote, "The flooding succeeded beyond Wiley's wildest dreams. From 1965 to 1974, the number of single-parent households on welfare soared from 4.3 million to 10.8 million, despite mostly flush economic times. By the early 1970s, one person was on the welfare rolls in New York City for every 2 working in the city's private economy." Now, that's just amazing. That 1/3 of the people were now, compared to the private economy, were now on welfare rolls. So this is actually your history now. This has already happened. And on the page I named a number of the organizations that followed the same tactics. So what are those 8 points? Can we get to those 8 points? I think we have some time. We'll probably get interrupted, but we can finish it up. Colored Piven, 8 points. This is what is sometimes attributed to Alinsky, but it isn't really Alinsky's plan or authorship. It was just that they used Alinsky's organization skills to bring about those cadre of people to get more and more people on the welfare rolls and actually get the government going out getting people on the welfare rolls. And now they're importing people from foreign countries, want to take down any kind of border restrictions, and seducing people with the bait, like as if this is, seducing people into eating, like the pig into eating the corn until they finally shut the gate. But anyway, the 8 points are, first one, healthcare. Control healthcare, and you control the people. That was one of their plans. Poverty. Increase the poverty level as high as possible. Poor people are easier to control and will not fight back if you are providing everything for them to live. This is why we say homeschool, home education, private education, group education, whatever. Every congregation should be working this, and there's so many things in the works. But you can't do it unless you're doing the rules that Christ said, sitting down in the tens, hundreds, and thousands, because you have to gather together. But you don't do it by contract. You don't create big corporations. You do it by free assemblies, because the bonds are invisible bonds of love and caring and honor. And this will change you. This will give you a rebirth, which we will talk about later, probably in this afternoon show, what it meant to be born again. That is one of the original word for freedom, way back in cuneiform writing, back in Sumeria. The original word that they translate into freedom had to do with being born again, and we'll explain that later. But anyways, so the first item was control healthcare, increase poverty, which has actually been taking place, increasing the number of people on welfare rolls, broken homes. All your problems are coming out of that. Almost every one of your mass shooters is coming from these same broken homes that these two socialists were trying to create in order to bankrupt the system, Cloward and Piven. breaking the homes, breaking down marriage, breaking down the social institutions. That's where your mass shooters are coming from. 26 out of 27 of the most effective mass shooters have come from broken homes. That percentage is more than just telling. So increased debt. Are we increasing debt? Go look at the debt clocks. They're just skyrocketing up. Every time, they think it's a new victory because they increase the debt ceiling. They actually call failure success. They're calling good evil and evil good. So they increase the debt, not only private debt, but the public debt, substantial levels, almost unbelievable levels, just in the last few decades. Gun control, remove the ability to defend themselves from government. That was one of their plans, number 4. Number 5, welfare. Take control of every aspect of their lives, food, housing, income, education, everything. And, of course, education is the 6th one. Take control of what people read and listen to. The media, almost all the media is controlled by them. Even what we call the right, like Fox News, they're still advocating public education. They're still advocating Social Security. They're advocating all these things. Now, I'm not saying tear these systems down. That's not my plan. That's not Christ's plan. That's why he wasn't telling people to tear down Rome or tear down the Pharisees. He was telling them to repent, think a different way, start taking care of one another, and we'll get into the 12 rules of Christ. And I only break down these rules so that you can understand and see how it works. And we're only halfway through. We've got these, we're a little over halfway through, but we'll cover that when we return to Keys of the Kingdom. And then we'll show you some other rules that people have listed that are either good or bad. And so that you understand what you're up against.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188. Is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on satellite, internet, or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
So welcome back to Keys of the Kingdom. So we're looking at these 8 points to the road to socialism. written by Cloward Piven, and they wanted control of health care. So what would you do to prevent them from getting control of health care? Is vote for somebody who's going to dismantle Obamacare? No. Start taking responsibility for your own health. Most of your health problems result from what you eat. You are what you eat. If you're unhealthy, it's probably because you're eating unhealthy things. There's also, work can keep you healthy. Your physical activity. No pain, no gain. Poverty. What do you do to eliminate poverty? Outlaw rich people? Force distribution of wealth? No. Everybody can tell you that if you, especially in America, that if you come together as a family and you work together, you stay married, you are diligent in learning and applying yourself, that you will probably not be in poverty. If you do this as a community, even more so. So that brings us to the third thing, debt. They want to increase debt. How do you decrease debt? Well, that you help one another get out of debt and stay out of debt. You become the social safety net of the other people in your congregations, not to be slothful, but to be actually diligent in the righteous ways of Christ. Gun control, so that you can't defend yourself, that is their fourth thing. But it isn't guns that make you safe. It's caring about one another as much as you care about yourself. That's what's going to bring that invisible power of God to your side. Now, I'm not saying don't have guns, but if you think your salvation is in having guns, you've made a big mistake. Your salvation is coming together and being a government of love for one another. And this is why you sit down in the tens. If you sit down in the tens, you can help eliminate poverty and debt and bad health, as well as create a system of defense so that you're not alone. You're gathered together, but you're not bound by contract. You're bound by love and honor. Welfare. They want control of the welfare. Well, the welfare that they're talking about is the welfare that is a snare that David talks about and Paul talks about. What should have been for your welfare has become a snare. You don't want that welfare. You want the daily ministration of rightly dividing the bread from house to house for those people who are truly in need. And then you want to strengthen the poor so that they're not in need anymore, and then they become an asset to society instead of actually the draw on society. Education, well, that's a no-brainer. You should be educating your kids yourself and gathering together in every congregation, which should be your homeschool club. That's what your congregation is, and then you work together in your congregations of congregations, and you can create deals where your children can get diplomas and go on to higher education. There's no limit to what you could do if you had a little bit of imagination along the lines of the early church who were doing this. Religion, he says, remove a belief in God, from the government schools was their plan. Well, you're already homeschooling, so it doesn't really make any difference. And we've done plenty of programs showing that homeschoolers are way more well-adjusted and more capable of accomplishment than the people that are coming out of the public school system. The dumbing down. There are several states that are now considering to lowering the age, the percentage point for an F. When I went to school, anything below 70 was an F. Somewhere along the line, this changed. I didn't even know this. I didn't get that memo that it was anything below, what was the numbers? Like 59, I think, was an F. You had to get below 59 to be an F. Now they want to lower it to 39%. Anything below 40% is an F. What is that? I had to get 70%, or it was an F. Now you have to only get 40%. That's just unbelievable. You talk about dumbing down. And, of course, then they want to create class warfare. And Paul had to deal with this thing. No more Greek, no more Jew, no more this and that. You're not dividing people up by race or nationality because you're not seeking nationalism. You're seeking righteousness first. and nationalism second. And not even second. You won't need to seek nationalism if you seek righteousness first. So anyway, then I have on the same page the 10 communist rules for revolution. And I probably won't go through all of them because I do want to touch on, but I have a number of other lists of 12 rules for a life we have listed there, which is Jordan Peterson's 12 rules for a life, and an antidote to chaos. And his 12 rules are actually very much more metaphorical than the ones that we've been looking at. So, I mean, he'll start with, like, stand up straight and treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping, make friends with people who want the best for you. Well, all those kinds of short little brief statements need explanation, and, of course, that's what's in his book. And if you don't want to read, you can go on YouTube, and there's plenty of people talking about it. But back to those rules for the communist rules for revolution, you can hear them talked about a great deal on the ideological subversion page, where you listen to Yuri Bezmenov, who was a KGB agent and defected way back in the 1980s, I think. Anyway, the interview was 1985. And again, people were moving in the direction that the KGB could not believe their success, because the people just gravitated towards some of the ideas that they were going to try to, thought it would be difficult to promote in America. And of course, one of the great inroads is the media and public education was allowing them to bring in these ideas. He, like I said, he realized this demoralization and destabilization and creating crisis, and so that certain ideas would become normalized in our thinking, and that's, of course, going back to Polybius, who said, becoming accustomed to living at the expense of others. And so that now people think I have the right to live at your expense. That's what they think. You do not have a right. How could you have a right to live at other people's expense? You're taking away their right. If you think it's okay to take away the rights of others for your personal benefit, you will have your rights taken away for somebody else's personal benefit, and that's okay in the realm you have created for yourself. You are actually aligning your mind with a dominion of, what, if you want to use the word, hell. That's what you're doing. You're aligning your mind with the thinking of Satan. If we go to Ephesians, and somebody brought this up, quoting from Ephesians 5, let's see, 4:23. And he says, and he renewed, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind. And that's what we're seeing, is that these Piven and others are renewing you in the spirit of their mind. And the spirit of their mind is a covetous mind, who covets their neighbor's goods and want to benefit from that covetousness. That's what communism and socialism is all about. They're promoting covetous practices for your benefit. And the spirit of that is getting into your mind so that you cannot see that there's another way. And of course, Christ comes along preaching this other way. And so in the Bible, they're talking about be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Along what lines? Along the lines of Crowder and Piven, or along the lines of Jesus Christ? And verse 24, he goes on to say, and that ye put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. So again, you're supposed to be seeking this righteousness. It is not righteous to take away from your neighbor to benefit yourself, especially by force. Wherefore, putting away lying, speaking every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. That is not what I got out of Saul Alinsky's plan. Because he was talking deception and Machiavellian deception and sneakiness all the time. He says, and this is the verse that showed up where they asked, "Be ye angry and sin not." So is the Bible promoting you to be angry? Is that what it's doing there? Go back to that promoting slavery. The Bible does not promote slavery. Be ye angry and sin not, which is put in there by the translators, let not the sun go down upon your wrath. Be ye angry? See, it just depends on how you read it. Be ye angry, sin not. That's what they're trying to tell you. How do you sin not? Don't let the sun set down on your wrath. This is the same as the quote that we see in Matthew of Raka. If you have a beef with your brother and you're angry with him, go and settle with your brother before you bring your sacrifice to the altar. Make peace with your brother. I mean, there are people who didn't like some of the things that I've said or done, and so they abandoned the entire network. Why in the world would you do that? You're abandoning your neighbor and your brother. No, come together. You're seeking righteousness. You don't have to agree with me. You have to agree with Christ. And a lot of times when people disagree with things that I say, it's because they don't understand what I'm saying. And so, but, you don't have to believe that. Because, again, you're not supposed to be following me. You're supposed to be following Christ and Christ's example. And if you were, you would start looking like the early church. You would not be going to men who exercise authority one over the other. You would not be coveting your neighbor's goods. You would be laying down your life daily, and you would be sitting in the tens, hundreds, and thousands in free assemblies, taking care of one another's health, education, and welfare. But you're not doing that because you've abandoned the way. But anyway, he goes on to say, neither give place to the devil. Place to the devil. What had I just been talking about? What did Saul Alinsky say? Got his own kingdom. His kingdom is a prison. It's not his own dominion. He's got legal title to his cell. He gets to stay in his cell. He's created a prison for himself. He's created a prison for himself by rebelling against God. And if you're following in many of these ways that we've just been outlining, then you're rebelling against God as well. You're rebelling against the God of nature. And you are going to be subject to the cause and effect thereof. And as you judge, so shall ye be judged. And as you take away the freedom of others, you will lose your freedom. And somebody else will devour you as you wanted to take a bite out of your neighbor. You will be devoured. The one purse they talk about in Proverbs, the net is laid before the bird, and he is captured in the net of his own making. That's what this is all about. So anyway, let him that stole steal no more. So he's talking about, okay, let him that covet no more. Desire no more for the benefits of the world that is operating in those covetous practices. Sit down in the tens, hundreds, and thousands and start taking care of one another in righteousness, in love instead of anger and resentment. And he talks about laboring, working with his hands, the things which is good, that he may have to give to him that needeth. So that you practice his sharing. This is how the renewing of the mind comes about. This is how the rebirth comes about. Goes on to say, let no corrupt communication proceed out of the mouth. Well, you can't follow Alinsky's rules if you're not going to have corrupt communications proceed out of your mouth, because he had all kinds of Machiavellian plans there. But that which is good to the use of edifying, not tearing down others, but edifying others, that it may minister grace into the hearers. And grieve not the Holy Spirit of God, whereby ye are sealed unto the day of redemption. Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking. Remember how he was, using ridicule and all these things? You don't want to be doing that. To put away from you with all malice. And be ye kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God for Christ's sake hath forgiven you. Because if you don't, if you're dividing the people, if you're separating yourselves out from the tens, hundreds, and thousands, ain't going to be no loaves and fishes for you in the kingdom. As a matter of fact, you're not even going to be able to see the kingdom. You need to swallow your pride and come together in those tens, hundreds, and thousands. Start being the kingdom of God instead of seeking the dominion of Satan, which is where most people are headed. But anyway, we could go on in Ephesians 5, but we'll run back over here to the rules. The rules for who? The communist rules for revolution. Corrupt the young. I think that's pretty well done. Get control of all means of publicity. That's the media. I think that's pretty well done. We see even Facebook is constantly leaning in this one direction and removing. I mean, they let this Momo character wander around telling children how to commit suicide and deceive their parents and lie and all these other kinds of things, and but they go and censure all kinds of other people. What the heck? They had the technology to stop all those kinds of. I don't know if you know who the Momo character is. You probably don't want to even Google it, but you should be careful of letting your kids even get on social media at all. There's a lot of evil out there, more so than you can see. The Momo character is clearly evil, although I can show you articles talking about this Momo character that they actually say, oh, it's not that bad. But these are the same people that are delusional about so many other things. They don't know what is bad and what is good. But it says get people's minds off of their government by focusing their attention on athletics, sexy books, and other trivialities. And then when they do get their mind on government, can create a dialectic where they're divided, which is number 4, divide the people into hostile groups by constantly harping on controversial matters of no importance, which, of course, the whole Trump deranged syndrome. You ever notice how angry everybody is and how unreasonable everybody is? And that's why I say I find myself actually coming to the defense of Trump. I don't want to do that. But I want to pray for Trump. I hope he does well. Hope he does right. Hope he begins to seek righteousness. You're not going to accomplish anything by just tearing down other people all the time. Besides, what you really can do something about is what you do. You're not going to make other people do what you want them to do, but you could be doing a lot more than you, and Christ was giving you that plan. Like I said, we'll talk about that in the show this afternoon. It talks about destroy the people's faith in their natural leaders by holding the latter up to contempt, which is, again, back what Saul Alinsky was doing in his selective little groups, trying to, get good wages and opportunities for workers and everything that were being denied them. But see, that tactic was just simply carried over by Howard Piven to do terrible things, which they have already done and already moved this country. I mean, how are you going to reverse the debt now? Is there any hope? Have we gone past the point of no return? Well, as a nation, probably yes. We have gone past the point of no return. But as an individual, you can repent right now, which is what repenting is turning around and going the other direction. You can do something about that. You personally can do something about that. And I tell you, this hidden power of Christ, of Christ's Spirit, will come into you, and you'll be born again. And again, I'll explain more about being born again in the afternoon show. Always preach true democracy. No, democracy, like I've said, if you look up the definition of democracy, I should put a live link to democracy. Democracy, until sometime after 1927, was considered an evil form of government, a bad thing, something you didn't want to fight for. But by 1954, it was in the same publication. It was now completely reversed. This is that they're changing your mind, but you're looking in the wrong places for the answers. So it is changing your mind. Christ can change it back. And in number 7, by encouraging government extravagance, destroying its credit, and producing fear and inflation. That was a plan. That's your history. You've already done that. Number 8, foment unnecessary strikes in vital industries, encourage civil disorders, foster a lenient and soft attitude on the part of government towards such disorders. That's all gone in the past. Now, most businesses, many important businesses have gone overseas. People are fighting over ridiculous things, arguing about ridiculous things. We've gone so far beyond this plan. You should be reading the second list that is a part of this plan. It says, by specious arguments cause the breakdown of the old moral virtues, honesty, sobriety, continence, faith, just goes on and on. Individual ruggedness. They want all that to go away, and it has gone away. We're more unhealthy, more poorly educated, less morals than any other time in the history of America. And they put down everything. When was America ever great? Well, you wouldn't know. You don't even know history, because they stopped teaching history in your public school years and years ago. So, yeah, you wouldn't know when America was great. You have to remember, America and the United States are not synonymous terms. But there was greatness in America at one time. Not as great as it should have been, maybe, but a lot better than it is today. But anyway, I'm sure people want to argue that, and we'll have to do that in some other long conversation. But number 10, cause the registration of all firearms on some pretext with the view of confiscating them and leaving the populace helpless. Well, again, what leaves you more helpless than anything else is you don't have the religion of Christ, the religion of early Christianity. And the religion of early Christianity required that the people sit down in the tens, hundreds, and thousands so that they could actually love one another, care for one another, create that daily ministration that operated by faith, hope, and charity, not the forced tribute of Caesar and the violence of a government that exercised authority one over the other. So anyway, then I go into the 12 Rules for Life, which I probably should link that to some of their pages so that you can go, and if you're completely unfamiliar, you can kind of see, because you can't really tell from the list. I just put it here because there's a lot of lists on this page, and but it's metaphor, so it's difficult to see exactly what he's talking about. But it's very basic approach to things. It's getting your own act together, getting your own life together, because you can't solve the problems of the world, but you can do something about your own life. And he's having a profound effect on a lot of people. But after you stand up straight and clean your room, what do you do next? Where do you go after you get these, you've done these 12 rules, and you've implemented in your life? Where do you go from next? And that's why I get into what I call the 12 Rules of the Way, which I wrote rapidly this morning. I have a lot of live links in this really brief description of the 12 rules, and they're basically, I'll just run over them. I think I have enough time here. I'm running out of time. Repent is the first one. Seek the kingdom of God because you love God. Seek the righteousness of God because you love one another. So there, we've got the 2 commandments that Christ summed up the 10 commandments in right there. But then I go on to other things like sit down in the tens and live links, forgive, so that you may be forgiven. Love as in charity, loving one another. It's just basic common sense. Judge not, swear not, keep the commandments. These are all things Christ said.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.